My mother stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, finger pointed at my face, voice sharp enough to cut glass. You will apologize to your sister, right now, in front of everyone. I could feel 23 pairs of eyes burning into me. My sister dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin, calm as ever, like she'd already won. And maybe she thought she had. Maybe they all did. But my hands weren't trembling from shame. They were trembling because of the phone call I'd made 6 days ago. The one none of them knew about. I looked at my mother and said, "I'm not apologizing." She opened her mouth to scream. Then the doorbell rang. And the officer standing on the porch didn't ask for me. My name is Elaine, and I'm 36 years old. I live alone in a small apartment about 2 hours from the town where I grew up. I work as an administrative coordinator at a medical office. It's not glamorous. It's not the kind of job that makes people ask follow-up questions at parties. But it's mine. I built it from nothing after years of being the sibling nobody invested in. My sister, Corinne, is 2 years younger than me. She was always the one they talked about with pride. Corinne got the dance lessons. Corinne got the car for her 16th birthday. Corinne got the down payment on her first house from our parents. I got hand-me-downs and the expectation that I would be grateful for whatever scraps rolled my way. And for a long time I was. Or at least I pretended to be. I spent my 20s trying to earn the kind of love they gave Corinne for free. I called every weekend. I sent gifts for every birthday. I showed up to every holiday with a dish I spent hours making, hoping someone would notice. Nobody ever did. I wasn't rich or glamorous. But I had something they didn't expect. I had patience. And I had the truth. Now before I go any further, I know some of you watching this have been in that exact position. Sitting at a table surrounded by people who are supposed to love you. Being told to swallow your feelings just to make someone else comfortable. If that's you, I want you to know this story is for you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about people who finally stopped staying quiet. And if you've ever been forced to apologize for something you didn't do just to keep the peace, drop that in the comments. I read every single one. Hit that like button too, and click hype because it really does help these stories reach the people who need to hear them. So let me take you back to that Thanksgiving. It was last November. My mom hosts every year at the old family house. The one with the creaky porch and the kitchen that always smells like onions and butter, no matter what time of year it is. By the time I pulled into the driveway, there were already cars lining both sides of the street. Aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, a few people I honestly didn't recognize. My mom likes a full house. She says it makes her feel loved. What she really means is she likes an audience. I walked in carrying a sweet potato casserole I'd been perfecting for 3 days. Nobody said hello. My cousin Jeanette gave me a half wave from the living room. That was it. I set the dish on the counter and found a seat at the long table they'd set up in the dining room, extending into the hallway with a folding table and mismatched chairs. Corinne was already seated at the center, right next to my mom, laughing loudly about something on her phone. She looked up when I sat down and gave me this look. Not hostile exactly. More like amused. Like I was entertainment she hadn't ordered, but was willing to watch. Dinner started fine. Turkey got carved. Plates got passed. People talked over each other the way big families do. Then about 40 minutes in, Corinne set her fork down and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "So Elaine, are you ever going to explain what you did to Mom's savings account?" I felt the air leave the room. I looked at her. "What are you talking about?" She tilted her head, and there was that smile. "Don't play dumb. Mom told me everything. You took money from her account last spring." She was too embarrassed to bring it up, but I think the family deserves to know. It was a lie. A complete, fabricated, absolute lie. I had never touched my mother's money. Not once. Not ever. But before I could even open my mouth, my mom looked at me with this expression I'd seen 100 times before. Disappointment wrapped in disgust. "Elaine, I think you owe your sister an apology for putting her in the position of having to bring this up." I said, "Mom, that didn't happen. I never touched your account." She cut me off. "Apologize to your sister." Now, Uncle Ray cleared his throat. Aunt Donna looked at her plate. Nobody defended me. Nobody even looked confused. They just accepted it, like this was the natural order of things. Elaine does something wrong. Elaine gets corrected. Corinne gets validated. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the silence like a scratch on glass. I said, I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do. Corinne laughed. Actually laughed. This is exactly what I was talking about. She can't even take accountability. My mom's face went red. Sit down, Elaine. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't sit down. And 17 minutes later, the doorbell rang. But let me back up a little, because what happened at that table didn't start at that table. It started months earlier. In the spring, my mom had called a family meeting to discuss what to do with my late grandmother's property. A small house on a half-acre lot that had been left to all three of her children, including my mom. There were decisions to make about selling it, splitting the proceeds, handling the taxes. I found out about this meeting 3 weeks after it happened. Corinne mentioned it casually on the phone, like it was nothing. Oh, we already decided to sell. Mom's handling the paperwork. I said, nobody told me. She said, well, it didn't really concern you. That was betrayal number 1. Being erased from a decision that absolutely concerned me. Since my grandmother had specifically mentioned me in her will, as someone who should have a say in the property's future, I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I did. Then came betrayal number 2. Over the summer, I started hearing from relatives that Corinne had been telling people I was going through something. That I'd been acting erratic, that I'd shown up to my mom's house once and caused a scene. None of that was true. I hadn't even visited my mom's house since Easter. But Corinne had planted the seed, and it had grown roots. By the time Thanksgiving came, half the family already looked at me sideways. She had rewritten the story so thoroughly that people who had known me my whole life treated me like a stranger they needed to be cautious around. And then betrayal number 3. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mom called me. Her voice was cold and flat. She said, I think it would be best if you came to dinner and made things right with your sister. If you can't do that, then maybe we need to take a break from each other. A break. That was her word for cutting me off. She was giving me an ultimatum. Apologize to Corinne for things I never did, or lose my family. I sat on my kitchen floor that night with the phone still in my hand, staring at the ceiling, and something shifted inside me. Not rage, not sadness, something quieter. I stopped wanting to defend myself. I stopped trying to explain. I just started watching and waiting. What they didn't know was that I'd learned to keep receipts. Not out of spite, out of survival. It started about 2 years before that Thanksgiving, after an argument where Corinne accused me of something I'd said on a phone call. She twisted my words so badly that my mom stopped speaking to me for 6 weeks. After that, I started saving everything. Text messages, voicemails, emails, screenshots of social media posts where Corinne would subtly mock me for her friends to see. I kept a folder on my laptop, then a backup on a flash drive, then printed copies in a manila envelope I kept in my filing cabinet at work. I wasn't building a case. At least, that's not what I told myself at first. I was just making sure that if anyone ever tried to rewrite history again, I'd have the real version. But over time, the things I found went beyond family drama. There were messages between Corinne and my mom discussing how to remove my name from the grandmother's property, without my knowledge. There was a voicemail from Corinne to a cousin where she admitted she'd made up the story about me taking money from my mom's account, laughing about it like it was a joke. And there were records. Financial records. Ones that showed Corinne had been the one accessing my mother's savings. Not me. She'd been siphoning small amounts for over a year, and she'd preemptively blamed me to cover her tracks. I spent late nights at my kitchen table organizing those files. The apartment would be dead quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below. I didn't feel powerful doing it. I felt tired. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. Certainty. This wasn't the first time my family had crossed a line. But it was going to be the last time they crossed it without consequence. There was one person who had been quietly in my corner for longer than I realized. His name was Gerald. He was a retired family attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate years ago. He'd known our family for decades, and he'd seen how things worked behind closed doors. Gerald had reached out to me about 8 months before that Thanksgiving. He'd heard through a mutual connection that I'd been excluded from the property decision. He called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "Elaine, I need you to listen carefully. What they did with that property decision isn't just unfair. Depending on how the will was structured, it might not be legal." I didn't act on it right away. I wasn't ready, but Gerald kept checking in. He reviewed the documents I'd been saving. He told me which ones mattered, and which ones were just noise. He helped me understand that Corinne accessing my mother's account and blaming me for it wasn't just a family squabble. If she'd filed any kind of formal claim or report using that false accusation, it could constitute fraud. And as it turned out, she had. Corinne had gone to the bank in August and filed a dispute on a transaction, naming me. She'd signed a statement. A false one. Gerald told me I had every right to file a police report. I did it 6 days before Thanksgiving. I didn't tell anyone. Meanwhile, back at my mom's house, the family was riding high. Corinne had everyone convinced she was the responsible one, the truth teller, the protector of my mother's finances. My mom was boasting to Aunt Donna in the kitchen that morning, before dinner even started. I heard her say, "I handled it the family way. No courts, no lawyers. Just accountability." She meant me. She meant forcing me to grovel. I stood in the hallway listening to that, and I didn't feel angry. I felt calm, because I could hear something she couldn't. The clock was ticking, and the footsteps were coming. The doorbell rang at 6:47. I know because I glanced at the clock on the wall above the kitchen doorway. Everyone at the table went quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet from before. A confused quiet. Nobody was expecting anyone else. My mom wiped her hands on her napkin and pushed back from the table. "Who on earth is that?" She walked to the front door. I stayed in my seat. I could hear the door open. I could hear a man's voice, steady and official. "Good evening, ma'am. Are you Patricia Duval?" My mom's voice changed immediately. It got higher, tighter. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" The officer stepped inside. Not aggressively. Calmly. He was tall, with a clipboard in one hand and a calm expression that didn't waver. He said, "Ma'am, I'm here regarding a complaint that was filed with our department. May I speak with you and a Corinne Duval?" The silence in that dining room was so thick I could hear the ice shifting in someone's water glass. Corinne stood up slowly, her face already changing. The smugness was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen on her face in years. Fear. "What complaint?" she asked, her voice cracking just slightly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Gerald. I stepped into the hallway and answered. He said, "I just spoke with the officer's supervisor. Everything's been filed properly. You're protected, Elaine. Just let it unfold." I walked back into the dining room. The officer was explaining to my mother that a formal complaint had been filed regarding a false financial statement submitted to a banking institution. He mentioned Corinne by name. He referenced the signed dispute she'd filed in August. He said the bank had cooperated and provided records that contradicted her claim entirely. Corinne's face went white. She looked at my mom. "Mom, say something." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. The officer continued. He explained that the recordings and documentation submitted with the complaint supported the case, that an investigation would be opened, that both Corinne and my mother could be contacted for further questioning in the coming weeks. Corinne spun toward me. "You did this? You called the police on your own family?" I looked at her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smirk. I just said, "I told the truth. I just stopped protecting you." Uncle Ray leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Aunt Donna put her hand over her mouth. One of my cousins quietly picked up their plate and walked to the kitchen. The officer asked if there were any questions, and when nobody answered, he gave my mother a card and said someone from the department would be in touch. Then he left. The door closed behind him, and the room stayed silent. Nobody touched the rest of the food. The turkey sat there getting cold. The cranberry sauce had a skin forming on top. I could smell the cinnamon from the pie somebody had put in the oven earlier. now mixing with the sharp, almost metallic scent of tension that hung in the air like smoke. Corinne sat back down and stared at the table. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just sat there, looking at her hands like she didn't recognize them. My mom stayed standing by the door for a long time after the officer left. When she finally turned around, she looked at me, and for just a second, I thought she might say something real, something honest. But she didn't. She just shook her head and walked into the kitchen without a word. I didn't make a speech. I didn't point fingers. I didn't say, "I told you so." I finished my glass of water, pushed in my chair, and went to the hallway to get my coat. My cousin Jeanette followed me. She didn't say much, just touched my arm and whispered, "I'm sorry, Elaine." I nodded. That was enough. I walked out to my car in the cold November air. The sky was dark already, and I could see my breath. I sat behind the wheel for a minute before starting the engine. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt light. Like I'd been carrying a bag of rocks up a hill for years, and I'd finally just set it down. I didn't win by being louder than them. I didn't win by humiliating them the way they'd humiliated me. I won by choosing myself. By deciding that my peace was more important than their comfort. By refusing to apologize for existing. Sometimes the quietest thing you can do is the most powerful. I drove home that night with the windows cracked, cold air on my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't replay the argument in my head. I just drove. And the silence in that car felt nothing like the silence at that table. It felt like freedom. If you've ever been the person at the table who was told to apologize for something you didn't do, just to keep everyone else comfortable, I want you to know that your voice matters. You're not crazy for wanting the truth to be heard. And you're not selfish for refusing to carry someone else's lie. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment and tell me about a time you were pressured into silence. I want to hear your story. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I know how hard it is to stand up for yourself, especially when the people you're standing up to are the ones who were supposed to stand up for you. But you're not alone in this. This community is full of people who understand exactly what that feels like. So hit subscribe if you haven't. Click hype if this story helped you or made you feel seen. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what part of this story stuck with you. I read every single one. And I'll be right here with another story soon. Take care of yourselves. And remember, peace is always louder than obedience.